Hey there! Today we're going to talk about the most important element of flavor, and it's this, and this, which is salt. Now, I think a lot of people take salt for granted. This is probably the most important thing in your kitchen when it comes to flavor. This is the reason that people go to restaurants, besides the fact that they don't want to cook. The reason that food at restaurants tastes better is because they add more salt to it. And of course, there's, like a health aspect. You don't want to super salt your food, you'll be bloated for life. But like this ultimately is going to be one of your most important tools for making your food taste good. You can add all sorts of other stuff to make something taste good, but if this isn't right, it's just not going to hit the nail on the head. So there's some really important factors that you need to be aware of when it comes to salt. So first, there's many different kinds of salt. This actually is kosher salt here, and this is Diamond brand, which I love. There's also like flaked sea salt, regular sea salt, and then there is, the Morton stuff, the little tin that everybody grew up with. That's iodized salt, and it works, but it can be really, really, really salty. It's actually more salty than stuff like this, and it can have like a chemically taste to it. It can be a little like harsh on the palate. So if you taste something like kosher salt or sea salt and you literally just sprinkle some on your tongue, like you're gonna notice like a clean saltiness, right? It's kind of like the equivalent of being at the ocean, right? You get that kind of clean ocean air. And if you do the same thing with iodized salt, you can get kind of like a little chemically aftertaste. And if you have a really sensitive palate, like some people are super tasters or some people are just more sensitive, like they'll pick that up and it's actually not great for them. So there's one really important thing about salting food, and it's that when you salt food, you should know right away when you've hit the right amount of salt. You should be able to feel it physically, right? Like I say that the food sings. Like you'll know that when you add salt to something and it's not enough, you're gonna taste it and you'll be like, something's off. It's just not right. It's missing something. And then if you add more salt and you taste it again, when you hit it, you'll feel like a zing. You'll feel like this really amazing just feeling. It'll feel right. It'll feel like it sings, like a hidden note, and it's a perfect note. And that's what you're going for when it comes to salt. There's other salty items that you can use in your kitchen besides regular salt. You can use things like miso. Miso is really salty. You can use things like soy sauce. Soy sauce is also really, really salty. There's fish sauce. There's a whole world of salty things that you can add to your food. And the thing that's really important to know is you don't want to salt your food, add like salt like this, like granulated salt, until you've added all of your salty ingredients. Because if you salt according to this and it tastes great, and then you add soy sauce, man, you're good. It's not going to be good. It's going to suck super bad. And then you can't really save something that is too salty. Like the only thing you can do is duplicate the recipe without anything salty and then like dilute the saltiness. Like once something's salty, it's kind of a wash. So it's like bail out at that point. So the reason that salt is so important, besides the fact that it tastes like salt, right? Salt actually balances other flavors, and it can make sweet things taste a little more sweet. And it's not that they taste more sweet, it's that they taste more balanced. Like you can add salt to like an acidity thing that's a little too tart, and the salt will like kind of take down that tartness. Like salt can help deal with bitterness. If you have something that's got like a little bit weird bitter flavor, like if you have eggplants or something. And in fact, eggplants, when you're cooking with eggplant and your eggplant is bitter, you actually salt your eggplant ahead of time. And then you just let it sit there and the salt actually draws out a lot of that bitterness. So salt is not only important on its own as a flavoring, it's also a really important adjustment factor so that you can fix maybe other problems that are happening. And we're actually going to do a demo right here. So this is just normal, everyday whipped cream. And the only thing in here right now is cream and sugar. And I'm gonna taste it. And actually, I want you to do this at home. Like just go get a little carton of whipped cream, whip it up, add just like a little bit of sugar. You don't want it to be too sweet, but just enough to like kind of hit that sweet spot on your palate. Taste it. It tastes good, it's sweet. What you're gonna do is you're gonna take a little sprinkling of salt and sprinkle it on your whipped cream. And then you're gonna whip it in. Probably do this in a bigger bowl, but whip it in, and then we're gonna taste it. And what you're gonna notice when you taste your whipped cream after you salt it, it tastes more sweet, which is interesting, but it also hits it just tastes more well-rounded. It just tastes more balanced. And if you're tasting your whipped cream and it doesn't taste more balanced, then add a little bit more salt. And what's important to mention here, it's actually really good. What's important to mention here is This is not a pinch of salt. Like if you look, it's like boop, like that's not very much salt. Like a good professional pinch of salt is like that. You're gonna take these two fingers and this thumb, and you're gonna grab a pinch of salt. And it's a fair amount of salt. Like this is a professional pinch. This is how chefs salt at restaurants, which is why their food tastes so good. And it's really important to keep in mind that if you're literally adding like a teeny pinch of salt, like it's going to take you forever to salt your food, and you're going to actually think that you're adding more salt than you actually are, because if you keep adding this, it's just going to feel like you're adding a lot, when if you had just done one big pinch like this, it would ultimately satisfy in one pinch and it'll feel like less. Now there's a couple important factors that you need to keep in mind as far as when to salt. So if you're cooking something like meat, you want to salt cuts of meat 24 hours ahead of time. And that's because what the salt does is it actually infiltrates the meat and helps to break down the fibers. But by way of osmosis, if you put salt on the surface of meat, like on a pork chop or a chicken breast, very slowly over 24 hours, it's going to slowly like make its way all the way into the middle of your meat, all the way down to the bone or to the very middle of it. And what that's doing is it's seasoning your meat from within. And like you can salt meat right before you cook it and it'll taste good, but the difference when you salt your meat like 12 to 24 hours ahead of time, it's incredible. And if you have a big roast, like a big fatty like pork shoulder or something, you want to do it up to 48 hours ahead. And again, you're not using a little bit of salt. When you're salting meat, you're like putting a fairly generous coating of salt on it, because it's got to be enough salt to be able to not only coat the surface area, but if you think about it in sort of a 3D sense, like it's got to get all the way through the middle to the very center of the meat. So it takes a fair amount of salt. And then you can rinse it off if you want when you're done, but there probably won't be that much salt on the surface anyway. When you're salting things like vegetables, you don't want to salt them that far ahead of time, because salt, the same reason that it's actually so great with meat, it soaks into the meat, it soaks into the vegetables, and because salt is hygroscopic, it actually spits out all the water when you end up with soggy veggies. So with soft veggies or sort of fragile veggies, you don't want to salt them until they're done. Now, harder veggies like, butternut squash or a potato, they're a little harder. You might actually want to hasten their softening, like carrots, in which case you can salt them ahead of time, and it'll actually soften them faster, which can be good for cooking time. When it comes to other items like fish, fish is really delicate. You don't want, even though it's a meat, technically, you don't want to salt it that far ahead of time because it'll make it kind of mushy and weird. So I generally recommend salting fish and seafood maybe 15 minutes ahead of time. Salmon can probably go as far as like 20 or 30. You don't really want to push it because you're going to ruin that really beautiful texture that the fish has. So now that you have a basic understanding of salt, what I want you to do is get some whipped cream, do my little demo test that I did, go out and get some real salt, like get some, sea salt or some kosher salt. Malden's a really good one. Diamond is also a really good one. You can even just go to the grocery store and get their standard sort of sea salt or kosher salt. Like, it doesn't really make that big a difference. But I want you to play with salt. I want you to like start flavoring things with salt and really think about how it tastes. Like taste something, pause, and really consider how much salt it has, how much it needs, what's missing. It's gonna be really helpful with your cooking.